plants and microbes. And Harold's starting to perk up now because it's such exciting stuff that it can barely stay in the seat. This is a cyanobacteria here. This is the eukaryotic alga diatom. And we'll start with the simplest things that perhaps aren't even considered living organisms and work our way up to the more complex. All organisms have viruses. Why may they not be considered truly living organisms? I mean, some people don't even define them as life. Honestly.
Because a virus cannot reproduce on its own.
That's true. That's why. And it really can't do much of it. It completely uses the molecular machinery of its host to reproduce. On the other hand, I don't think there's any organism that can live on its own anyway. I mean, we have to have plants, right, to survive because we have to have food to eat. So there's a narrow line there. But what people have found, though, perhaps over, ecologically over the last 30, 40 years, is that all organisms have viruses, and some of those can be very important ecologically. So, for example, there's viruses that infect all the phytoplankton species out there that are in lakes and the ocean. Every species where it's ever been looked for, they have viruses. Right? So it's a very important and deep phylogenetic part of being an organism on this planet. The organisms can be composed of RNA or DNA, and they can have a covering of proteins or some other molecules at times. And these are what are used to classify what type of virus it is, that and the species that they are able to infect. Some of them are extraordinarily narrow, some of them are extraordinarily broad. Some of them can infect a whole lot of different types of organisms, some of them are only can affect one or two species. There's another group of compounds that's perhaps even less likely to be considered life, and that is the prions. And that these are essentially protein sequences that if they come in contact with other proteins in an organism, they cause conformational changes in those proteins, and then that ability can be spread out. So mad cow disease is an example of that, where if cows eat the brains of other cows, that protein gets into their brain and it causes it to take that other form, and eventually they die. There's a series of diseases like that. That kind of stuff probably happens all the time in nature to other species that are less important to humans. It's just that we haven't studied it much. Yeah.
Where did viruses come from? Like, where did they evolve from? Or
that's a question that nobody really knows the answer to. So there's two potential candidates for it, right? One is that you had, say, a parasite, and we know that parasites evolve simpler and simpler systems because anything they can put off on their host, they will. So even some of the simple eukaryotic parasites actually have lost their mitochondria because they can just use their host's mitochondria. So maybe it was a parasite organism. The other theory is that it was a rogue sequence of DNA that basically, or RNA, that went out and got the ability to go out and infect other cells from that one through bad luck in evolution for the host, for the virus that would have been good luck in evolution because they were selected for it. Apparently, though, they've been around for as far back as we can figure. So so I don't think it's a really good question. It's been asked by many people, and they're evolving along with us.
Those are pictures of real
virus.
Right. Yes. These are what they call virus-like particles. And so a colleague of mine was interested in filtering different sizes of particles out of lake water. And what they did is actually they took their filters and they put them under electron microscopy to look at the size of the holes, because these filters are constructed so they have supposedly very regulated hole size. And the thing that he noticed when he did that, one, was that their hole sizes were not that regular. But two, all these lake samples that he looked at had these things that looked like viruses. So this is that kind of lunar lander looking geometric shape. All these things are things that look like the viruses that microbiologists have been studying that were known, but they're floating around in the lake. They weren't really sure what they were infecting. They weren't sure if they were infective at all, so they call them virus-like particles. And now there's been ecological experimentation on them, and we're getting a better and better idea of, yeah, many of these are infective particles, and many of them are out there. So there's probably more numerous number of virus-like particles in a lake or in a stream than any other type of bacteria or anything. There's tons of them floating around out there. Okay, so now I'm out of the viruses and then back into the organisms that are essentially considered life. The archaea, as I mentioned, are as different from bacteria as eukarya. They originally, when they were originally described, they were described from hyperthermic environment, high temperature, very saline environments, anaerobic environments. So it was thought they were extremophiles. And it was thought that they were the oldest organisms out there. Hence the archaea means very old, right? And the reason I think that people thought that was, when they found the extremophiles, like these super high temperatures, that's, and the low oxygen, and that's the conditions that we understand were occurring on Earth when the planet formed, right? It formed very hot and it slowly cooled down, and eventually oxygen permeated the environment through the action of cyanobacterial photosynthesis. Now, it turns out that they're really essential nutrient cycling, and you can find them in all kinds of environments: cold environments, hot environments, soils, lakes, streams, oceans. They're really pretty much everywhere. And they're pretty key in some parts of nutrient cycling, and we'll see that as we go through that. They basically didn't exist when I took classes like this. People were just starting to figure out about them at that point. I didn't get exposed to it until I was in graduate school, and then it started exploding. So. Probably the most important organisms in nutrient cycling on Earth are bacteria, and you'll see why. I'll try to show you that. It turns out when you use molecular technique, we can maybe culture a few percent so that we can actually grow them in the laboratory. Most of them, we don't know exactly what they are other than they have unique sequences. Perhaps we can get genes for some functions, different proteins, enzymes that they put out, so we're starting to have a better idea. Most species have only very few morphologies. So taxonomy of bacteria has been based even historically on metabolic characteristics, which are derived from molecular, right? That is, if you have an enzyme for peroxidase, you've got the genes for peroxidase, or the ability to denitrify or something like that. And now, based on the other chemical characteristics, the ribosomal RNA sequences, the DNA sequences, the things that we talked about earlier in this lecture. Cyanobacteria are a really important group as far as aquatic ecology and water quality goes, and they're included in this group. They were moved from being related to the plants into the bacteria when we realized they were truly bacteria. And this is the very last slide for the day. As I said, there's a sort of fairly limited range of morphologies of bacteria, and this is kind of most of them. You can have a chain of bacilli, or a chain of coccus spheres, a spiral shape, another spiral shape, one longer filaments. And these are all things that you've seen these because it's the first characteristic people notice under a microscope when they culture you for strep throat, streptococcus look like that. Or if you have a staph infection, that's microscopically what it looks like, that sheet of cells.